Today, I'm joined by Ingela Mauritzon, founder and CEO of Fabola Learning and Strategy, a company on a mission to demystify medtech regulation for startups, scale-ups, and investors. Ingela's path here is unconventional, from working at an international hospital in Beijing to her patient experience and lab work in Sweden. Now she's deep diving into the regulatory space and even doing her PhD in the field. In this episode, we dig into one of the most overlooked bottlenecks in medtech innovation. We explore why up to 80% of product development costs can be tied to regulatory compliance, and why Europe's fragmented market is so much harder to navigate than the US. So let's dive straight in. Ingela, welcome. Would you like to introduce yourself?
Absolutely. Really nice to be here. My name is Ingela Mauritzon. I'm from Sweden. You can't hear that on my accent because I was brought up in the UK and I've lived sort of 20 years abroad apart from that as well. And that's how I got into healthcare. I worked at a international hospital in Beijing in the noughties and got really into healthcare. So when we moved back to Sweden subsequently, that's kind of what I built my career on. So I've worked with patient experience and patient flows, and then COVID hit. So I got into more lab work, and from there I got into IVDs, so in vitro diagnostics, which we work with in labs, and that's basically my road into regulatory. And now I'm actually doing my PhD in regulatory science and innovation. So I got really nerdy. You could say I got stuck in this world.
Very nice. So that's a new angle on all of this experience of the global healthcare system you've got. What makes you excited or curious about regulatory, and what made you want to get into that space?
Well, I have my master's actually in innovation and entrepreneurship, and one of the challenges that I've seen with entrepreneurship is actually just getting your product out to the customer and onto a market. And for medtech products, this is one of the challenges that we saw in the labs, just our suppliers being able to get their products out to the market. And it's something that I've thought about a lot with entrepreneurial products in general. In medtech, I think about 80% of the cost of developing a product is subsequently spent on regulatory. So it is a huge part of actually launching a product. And it's not only, regulatory fees, but it's also just making sure that the product is compliant and doing all the performance testing and making sure. And it's a really interesting and intricate part of getting a product into market. So that's where I get into it. I think it's once you start thinking about it and thinking about what regulation actually means, it really is such a big part of getting a product onto market and making it reliable to the patients.
One thing we're always talking about here is that every single medtech company we talk to or European stakeholder is talking about adoption. Getting products through innovation, through regulatory compliance, CE marking, FDA, etc., and into the market. And the enormous challenge of that, all the money, time and energy invested. What's your perspective on adoption as the big topic?
Yeah, adoption is everything, isn't it? And I think that if regulation is your passport into the country of entry, if you will, then you still have to make the journey, right? And you still have to do all the things. So my perspective is, I guess, being able to utilize the things that you do for regulatory. That is bringing up really good data on your product, making sure that it's safe, making sure that it works, and making sure that, all of these things are compliant. That can also be a way to make the product more sort of adoptable, if you will, because then you have marketing material, you have stuff that you can say about your product, and you have data to prove it, right? So I think a lot of people sort of grumble about regulatory, and they, but we have to then, spend time selling or whatever. But I mean, it really is, regulatory is also a shortcut to having your product be adopted by the healthcare system. So, and I don't know how many, I've had so many discussions lately with sort of purchasers of medtech within the Swedish regulatory system, and they're grumbling about products not being available and not being able to buy products because nobody wants to apply for a CE mark because it's too difficult. So there is a gap, and I think that the more we know about how we can make our products comply with what's needed to be complied to, the easier it will be for the healthcare system to adopt it.
What can we do as a community, the ecosystem, the incubators, the suppliers, regulators, the companies themselves, to improve the rate of adoption of Swedish innovation in Europe?
Oh, well, I think that in general, not only for Sweden, but for the whole of Europe, I think it's really about learning more about the people buying the product, and knowing what knowledge gaps there are. I've heard a lot of people say that, manufacturers don't know enough about the requirements. And so, for example, if you go in and you're going to sell a product that something easy like transcribation of transcribing medical records, right? It's a fairly easy thing, but still, when you've got it in a medtech situation, that's pretty high up on the MDR. So the medical device regulation scale is still a 2A device. So that requires a bit of planning and knowledge about how to get that through a regulatory system. And I think that the buyers are frustrated that a lot of the manufacturers and the innovators don't know that they can't buy it unless it's CE marked. So they don't know what they need to do. So I think that one thing we can do is really educate ourselves on what is my product? How is my product classified? What requirements are there? And I think that as innovation ecosystem, that we can do better in also preparing the companies for that. I have yet to meet an incubator with a regulatory coach. So that's one thing that I would really like to see. We've got sales coaches, we've got, product development coaches, tech coaches, all of those things, but there are no regulatory coaches. And there's no regulatory support for innovators. And I think that as investors, they could also be better at supporting companies that have a clear regulatory plan and financing that. And I think that they don't really know that that's something that's really expensive and difficult to do.
So as your new role at Fabola, is that the problem that you're looking to solve, to fill the gap of regulatory knowledge and education for young companies trying to bring product to market?
Absolutely. I think that one of the things that I'm really trying to do is with my company, I'm doing some online courses right now, specifically targeted towards startups and scale-ups. As regulatory professionals, we often talk over the heads of people, and I think that a lot of the time it's, you know, this curse of knowledge. You assume that people know more than they do, and I think that a lot of the information is targeted towards people who are regulatory professionals, not innovators and startups. So I think a lot of the educational information needs to be adapted to startups and scale-ups, and I think that really the incubators and accelerators can also do a better job of bringing in people like me who know both worlds, both the world of startups and scale-ups and also the world of regulatory, because they really can't be separated.
It's been said in the past that regulation has been structured with very large corporates' involvement, possibly making it anti-competitive for younger, smaller companies. Is that something you'd agree with? Is MDR tilted towards the benefit of the corporates, or is it favourable to young companies as well?
The cost and time of regulation is so astounding. It takes... Just to do a conformity assessment, which is the part where the assessor goes in and audits the company, just that takes at least 9 months, and they're paid by the hour, right? So the cost and the time of doing regulatory work is so high that I would say absolutely does favour those who already have a structure for it and who have funding for it, right? So definitely yes. It does favour large companies. What I would say though as well is that there's a reason for this. The history behind the MDR and IVDR in Europe, and also the changes that we've seen in the United States and the increased regulatory burden around the world actually is a lot of the time due to safety problems so that they've had in the past. So the history of the IVDR and MDR is that there was a silicone breast implant scandal and a hip implant scandal in the kind of early 2000s that basically made a lot of people very, very ill and in fact caused death in some cases. So I think there's a reason for oversight and there's a reason for doing all of these things, and I think that actually most of the principles around the IVDR and MDR they're based on good science and safe products, which I absolutely agree with. However, I think that it's difficult. It really is difficult for young companies to navigate, and this could be made a lot easier. And as I said before, I think there's also like kind of a side industry of regulatory professionals and consultants and notified bodies, not in the least, that have kind of a also incentive to keep it a bit difficult as well, without sounding too conspiratory. I think that's really something to keep in mind. But also, I mean, in any business, if you have a high barrier to entry, you're going to have less competitors, right? So if you're able as a small company to actually navigate it and learn about it and use it, this can also be turned to a competitive advantage. If you know about how to do regulatory, and if you learn about how your product can meet those requirements, and if you can get funding for that, that's really going to put you ahead of the game.
How has it got to the point where the ecosystem and all of the players have not put regulatory as the key learning milestone in the development of products?
I don't know, Will. It blows my mind. This is very weird to me. I think it's just a very, very difficult world to get into, and it's quite complex. I mean, you really do have to you'd have to learn a lot of rules, and you have to learn a lot of compliance. And it's not really the kind of the fun part about developing a product. Most of the people who develop a product are they're innovators, and they have kind of a get to market logic. And we're taught to, also I've been in the innovation system for a long time, and we're taught to pitch, we're taught to sell, we're taught to kind of get to know our customers and so on. But part of that in the healthcare system is also understanding that the patient's not your customer. The healthcare system is your customer, and it's a big mammoth of a customer, right? So I think that's part of the problem, that you don't have a very clear distinction between the patient who's you talk a lot about patient focus and patient need, but then the actual buyer of your product and the client is a major hospital or region or something like that. So that makes it difficult, and I think it's frustrating to have to think about, tendering and about IVDR compliance and the AI Act and whatnot. I mean, it gets a little bit, it's a lot. That's what I'm trying to say.
Europe is a lot of markets with a lot of languages, some almost impenetrable in terms of getting through to a buyer or a stakeholder. And America is this great big market with one universal language and a clear access points. Why would any young medtech company go into Europe when America is so attractive?
Yeah, good question. America is very attractive, also from a regulatory point of view. They have one central entity, the FDA, who does clearance. The FDA also have a pathway called 510K, which is a pathway where you can you basically just compare your product to an existing product and get through clearance quite quickly. It's cheaper, it's quicker. Yeah, I mean, Europe is difficult. However, Europe is also a very big purchaser of medtech. So, I mean, if you're going to be on a global market, you really do have to be in Europe as well. It's not a given that you would choose Europe as a first market. But then again, if you're a European company, it's also not a given that just because you have FDA clearance that you're going to make it in the States. You still have to sell your product. And the competition is fierce. So I would say there are lots of considerations to be made. Another consideration is that it might be easier to do clinical trials first. If you want to do both, you could do clinical trials first in the United States and then bring some of that data into Europe. In the United States, they want you to do clinical trials on American people only. So that's also, Europe doesn't have such a strict requirement on that. So there are lots of little details that make global market access quite interesting. There are also other geographic areas other than America and Europe, Australia, New Zealand, for example, Japan, Malaysia, Brazil. I mean, there are lots of markets available where they have other rules than the FDA and the EU rules. So, I mean, I would say having a smart global strategy for expansion is really important to do, and it's important to know about all of the different regulatory requirements for each one so that you can plan those. Because usually it's bringing up the clinical data and making sure that you have compliant information. That's the important part. And so knowing how to kind of make that work more efficient is a really big part of understanding how to launch a product. And that's also something that I focus on a lot in my plan is strategic consulting and teaching. Is teaching people about how to think about market access in a smarter way.
Just before we move to last question, you mentioned the 510K. Is there an equivalent in Europe? Why not?
Yeah, I know. Let's ask the EU. Well, we have a different system. We've got a system that's divided into risk categories. We've got it divided into MDR and IVDR, which is so you've got medical device on one side and you've got in vitro devices on the other. So basically kind of lab products and everything else, basically. So for Europe, we have kind of a different system. We've also chosen to outsource the auditing and the checking of products to notified bodies, which are private companies that do kind of the checking and auditing. And they are designated by the EU, who's designated the oversight to the national authority. So in Sweden, that would be the Medical Products Agency, or Läkemedelsverket. Those are the ones who are in charge of kind of overseeing the Swedish notified bodies. In Sweden, we only have two, and they only do MDR. We have a different system. In the United States, they've chosen to do everything through the FDA. It's all centralized. It's a one-stop shop basically for all your regulatory needs. And there's good and bad. If the FDA decides that they have a specific direction that they want to take, they'll do that, and that affects everyone. Whereas in Europe, you've got notified bodies who are independent and who work independently on this, which gives it a little bit more freedom. It's weird too, because it's usually the other way around. It's usually the United States that are more kind of privatized and less state owned, but in this case it's the other way around. So Europe, I think, we'll see a few changes coming up. We're also right in the middle of kind of a shift or transition from the IVDD and the MDD system to the IVDR and the MDR. So it's going from a directive to a regulation, which is harsher. But we'll see where it lands. I think one of the changes that we will see moving forward is a fast track. So we'll see if they copy the United States version.
Last question. If you had a magic wand, what one thing would you change about the European medtech regulatory landscape?
I would change the timing and structure of the notified body system, and I would make it more predictable, how long it's going to take and how much it's going to cost. I think that's the one big change that Europe needs to make at some point, and that's the first thing that I would change as well. I would make it predictable, so that you know how long it's going to take and how much it's going to cost you, because then you can plan for that.
Very good, Ingela. Thank you very much for your input and your brilliant insight. Good luck with Fabola, and look forward to keeping in touch.
Thanks.
That is a wrap for this episode of Walk the Valley. Ingela gave us a fantastic, honest look at one of medtech's biggest blind spots, regulatory strategy. Her core message is clear. Regulation isn't just a hurdle, it's competitive advantage, if you know how to use it. The key takeaways: the innovation system is failing founders by not embedding regulatory knowledge from day one. And predictability of cost and timeline isn't a luxury, it's the foundation of any viable commercial plan. If this episode resonates with you, please subscribe and leave a review. And remember, you can also listen to Walk the Valley on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and YouTube. Thanks for tuning in, and until next time, keep walking the valley.